The sun beat down on Jake Morrison's back like a hot iron. His horse moved slowly through the dust and dirt of the main road. Behind him, 50 tired cattle walked with their heads down. Their ribs showed through their skin. The long summer without. Rain had been hard on everyone. Jake pulled his hat down to shade his eyes. He could see the town of Cedar Ridge up ahead. Smoke came from the chimneys of the small houses. People moved around in the streets. It looked like a good place to rest. His cattle were all he had left. 3 months ago, he owned over 500 head. The drought took most of them. Some died from lack of water. Others he had to sell cheap just to buy food. Now these 50 were his whole life. Jake was 32 years old. His face was brown from the sun. His hands were rough from years of hard work. He had been a cowboy since he was 16. Before that, he worked for the Texas Rangers. He knew how to use a gun. He knew how to track men and animals. But he had never learned how to fight the weather. The horse's hooves made soft sounds in the dirt. Jake looked at the buildings getting closer. He saw a church with a white steeple. Next to it stood a general store with a big wooden sign. A few women in long dresses walked on the wooden sidewalk. Men in work clothes talked outside the saloon. This looked like a peaceful town. Jake hoped the people would be friendly. He needed to buy supplies. His food was almost gone. His clothes had holes in them. The cattle needed water and grass. As he rode closer, Jake saw something that made him sit up straight in his saddle. A woman stood outside the general store. She wore a black dress that covered her from neck to feet. Her hair was red like autumn leaves. Even from far away, Jake could see she was beautiful. The woman looked up at the sound of his horse. Their eyes met for just a moment. Jake felt something strange in his chest. His heart beat faster. He had seen many pretty women in many towns, but this one was different. Jake touched the brim of his hat as he rode past. The woman nodded back. Her face was serious. She looked sad about something. Jake wanted to stop and talk to her, but he had work to do first. He guided his horse and cattle to the edge of town. There was a field with a small stream running through it. The water looked clean and fresh. Perfect for the animals. Jake climbed down from his horse. His legs were stiff from the long ride. He stretched his arms over his head. The cattle moved toward the water right away. They were very thirsty. An old man walked over from a nearby house. He had white hair and a kind face. "You can use the field," the man said. "Cost you 50 cents a day for the whole herd." "That's fair," Jake said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some coins. "Name's Jake Morrison." "I'm Tom Miller," the old man said. "I own the general store in town. You look like you've had a hard time." Jake looked at his thin cattle drinking from the stream. "Lost most of my herd to the drought. These are all that's left." Tom nodded. "It's been a bad year for everyone, but the rains came back last week. Things should get better now." "I hope so," Jake said. He felt tired in his bones. "I need supplies, food, coffee, maybe some new clothes." "My store has what you need," Tom said. "Come by when you're ready." Jake spent the next hour getting his cattle settled. He counted them twice to make sure they were all there. 50 head exactly. Each one was precious now. When the animals seemed happy with the water and grass, Jake walked back toward town. His boots made hollow sounds on the wooden sidewalk. People looked at him as he passed. Some nodded in a friendly way. Others just stared. The general store had a bell that rang when Jake opened the door. The inside smelled like coffee and leather, and soap. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. They were full of all kinds of goods. Tom Miller stood behind a long wooden counter. "What can I get you?" he asked. Jake looked around. "I need coffee, beans, salt pork, flour, some new shirts if you have them." "I've got all that," Tom said. He started gathering items from the shelves. While Tom worked, Jake heard the bell ring again. He turned to see who came in. It was the woman in black he had seen outside. Up close, she was even more beautiful. Her skin was smooth and pale. Her green eyes looked tired but strong. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore," Tom said. Your order came in on the wagon this morning. Thank you, Mr. Miller, the woman said. Her voice was soft but clear. Jake tried not to stare, but he could not help himself. Mrs. Whitmore moved around the store with grace. She knew where everything was. This was clearly her regular shopping place. Tom wrapped Jake's supplies in brown paper. That'll be $4.20, he said. Jake paid the money. As he picked up his packages, Mrs. Whitmore walked past him. She smelled like flowers and soap. For a moment, their shoulders almost touched. Excuse me, she said quietly. My fault, ma'am, Jake said. He stepped back to give her room. She looked at him for a long moment. Jake saw something in her eyes. Pain, maybe, or loneliness. He wanted to say something to make her feel better, but he did not know what words to use. Mrs. Whitmore bought her supplies and left the store. Jake watched her through the window as she put her packages in a small wagon. She climbed onto the seat and drove away without looking back. She's been having a hard time, Tom said quietly. Jake turned back to the counter. What do you mean? Lost. Her husband 8 months ago. Horse threw him and broke his neck. Left her with a ranch and a lot of debts. Jake felt sorry for her. He knew what it was like to lose everything. That's rough. She's a good woman, Tom said. Works harder than most men. But the ranch is too much for one person. Jake picked up his packages. Thanks for the supplies. As he walked back to his cattle, Jake could not stop thinking about Mrs. Whitmore. Her sad green eyes stayed in his mind. He wondered what her first name was. He wondered if she was really as alone as Tom said. The sun was setting when Jake made his camp by the stream. He built a small fire and cooked some beans and salt pork. The cattle lay down in the grass, nearby. Tomorrow he would have to decide what to do next. But tonight, as he sat by the fire drinking coffee, Jake found himself looking toward the direction Mrs. Whitmore had driven. Somewhere out there was a woman who needed help. And Jake Morrison had always been the kind of man who helped people in trouble. Eleanor Whitmore drove her wagon slowly along the dirt road. The packages from Miller's store bounced gently in the back. She held the reins with steady hands, but her mind was far away. The cowboy at the store had kind eyes. She noticed that right away. Most men looked at her with pity since Robert died. This one looked at her like she was still a real person. That felt strange after so many months of being treated like a broken thing. Eleanor's ranch was 5 miles from town. The road was bumpy and full of holes. Her wagon was old and needed repairs. Everything on the ranch needed repairs. But repairs cost money, and money was something she did not have. She passed the big oak tree that marked the halfway point. From here she could see her land stretching out on both sides of the road. Brown grass covered the hills. A few cattle moved slowly. In the distance, she used to have over 200 head. Now she was down to 43. The house came into view as she rounded the last bend. It was a simple wooden building with a front porch. Robert had built it with his own hands when they got married 3 years ago. Back then, it felt like a palace. Now it felt too big and too quiet. Eleanor stopped the wagon next to the porch. She climbed down and started carrying packages inside. Her arms were strong from months of doing men's work, feeding cattle, fixing fences, hauling water. Her hands were no longer soft like a lady's hands should be. Inside, the house was neat and clean. Eleanor kept it that way because Robert would have wanted it that way. His picture sat on the wooden table by the window. He smiled out from the frame like he was still alive. Sometimes Eleanor talked to the picture. It made her feel less alone. She put the supplies away in the kitchen. Coffee, flour, sugar, salt. The same thing she bought every week. There was never money for anything extra. No candy, no ribbons, no pretty cloth for new dresses. Just the basics to keep living. Eleanor walked to the window and looked out at her land. The grass was starting to turn green from the recent rains. That was good news for the cattle. But it might be too late to save the ranch. 3 days ago, Mr. Fitzgerald from the bank had come to see her. He was a thin man with small eyes and a sharp voice. He told her the loan payment was late again. He said if she could not pay soon, the bank would take the ranch. Eleanor had begged for more time. She told him about the drought and the cattle she had lost. She promised to pay as soon as she could sell some beef. Mr. Fitzgerald just shook his head and walked away. The truth was, Eleanor did not know how to run a ranch by herself. Robert had handled all the business. He made deals with other ranchers. He knew when to buy and sell cattle. He understood things about money and loans that confused Eleanor. She had tried to learn. She read Robert's old books about cattle ranching. She talked to other ranchers when she saw them in town, but most of them treated her like she was playing at being a rancher. They did not take her seriously. Eleanor walked out to the porch and sat in Robert's old rocking chair. The wood was smooth from years of use. She could still smell his pipe tobacco in the fabric of the cushion. The sun was getting low in the sky. Soon it would be time to check on the cattle and make sure they had enough water. Then she would cook dinner for one person again. Then she would sit by the fireplace and try to read. Then she would go to bed in a room that felt too empty. This was her life now. The same things every day. Work and worry and loneliness. Eleanor heard hoofbeats on the road. She looked up to see a rider coming toward the house. For a moment, her heart beat faster. But it was not the cowboy from town. It was Pete Hawkins, who worked for the Circle Bar Ranch. Pete rode up to the porch and touched his hat. "Evening, Mrs. Whitmore." "Good evening, Pete," Eleanor said. "What brings you out this way?" Pete looked uncomfortable. He was a young man, maybe 25 years old. He had always been polite to Eleanor, even after Robert died. "I hate to be the one to tell you this," Pete said, "but we found some of your cattle on Circle Bar land today. They got through a hole in your fence." Eleanor's heart sank. "How many?" "About 10 head, Pete said. Mr. Bradley sent them back to your land, but he wanted me to tell you that the fence needs to be fixed. He can't have your cattle eating his grass." Eleanor nodded. She understood. Every rancher had to protect his own land. "I'll fix it tomorrow." "Thank you for bringing them back." Pete started to ride away, then stopped. "Mrs. Whitmore, can I say something?" "Of course. You might want to think about selling the ranch," Pete said gently. "This is hard work for a man with help, for a woman alone." He did not finish the sentence. "I can't sell," Eleanor said. "This is all I have left of Robert." Pete nodded like he understood. "Well, if you ever need help with anything, you just let me know." After Pete rode away, Eleanor walked out to look at the broken fence. Sure enough, there was a big hole where the posts had rotted through. The wire sagged down to the ground. It would take money. She did not have to buy new posts and wire. Eleanor looked at the 10 cattle that had wandered back onto her land. They looked thin and tired. All her cattle looked that way. She did not have enough good grass to feed them properly. She did not have money to buy feed. Maybe Pete was right. Maybe she should sell the ranch and move to town. She could get a job, as a seamstress or a cook. It would be simpler. She would not have to worry about cattle and fences and bank loans, but this ranch was Robert's dream. He had worked so hard to build it. He always said they would have the best cattle operation in the county someday. How could she give up on his dream? Eleanor walked back to the house as darkness fell. She lit the oil lamp in the kitchen and made herself a simple dinner. Beans and bread and coffee. The same meal she ate most nights. As she ate, Eleanor thought about the cowboy from the store. He had looked at her like she was worth looking at. Not many men did that anymore. Most saw her as damaged goods. A woman who could not keep her husband alive. A woman who was failing at everything. The cowboy had kind eyes and strong hands. He looked like the sort of man who could fix a fence or handle cattle. The sort of man who would not run away when times got hard. But Eleanor had learned not to trust such thoughts. Robert had been a good man too, strong and kind and full of plans for the future. And now he was dead, and she was alone with problems too big for her to solve. She finished her dinner and washed the dishes. Then she sat by the fireplace with one of Robert's books. But the words swam together on the page. She was too tired and worried to concentrate. Eleanor blew out the lamp and went to bed. Tomorrow she would have to figure out how to fix the fence with no money. She would have to check on the cattle and hope none of them were sick. She would have to worry about the bank payment and wonder how much time she had left. In the darkness, Eleanor said a prayer like she did every night. She asked God to help her find a way to save the ranch. She asked him to give her strength to keep going. She asked him to send someone who could help her. But as she drifted off to sleep, Eleanor tried not to hope too much. Hope was dangerous when you had already lost everything that mattered. Eleanor woke up to the sound of cattle calling. But these were not happy sounds. The animals sounded scared and upset. She sat up in bed and listened. Something was wrong. She jumped out of bed and pulled on her clothes quickly. The sun was just starting to come up. Eleanor grabbed Robert's old rifle from the closet and ran outside. The sight that met her eyes made her stomach drop. Her cattle pen was empty. The gate hung open, swinging in the morning breeze. Hoof prints led away from the pen toward the hills. Eleanor ran to the pen and looked around. She counted the tracks. At least 20 cattle were missing, maybe more. These were her best animals, the ones she was planning to sell to pay the bank. She saw boot prints mixed in with the hoof prints. Men on horses had come in the night and stolen her cattle. Rustlers. Eleanor felt tears starting in her eyes. This was too much. First the drought, then Robert's death, then the money problems. Now this. How much was one person supposed to handle? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Crying would not bring her cattle back. She had to do something. Eleanor saddled her horse, a brown mare named Daisy. The horse was old but steady. Eleanor was not a great rider, but she could stay on. She followed the tracks leading away from her ranch. The trail was easy to follow at first. The rustlers had not tried to hide their path. They probably thought no one would come after them. Who would expect a woman to track cattle thieves? Eleanor followed the tracks for 2 hours. They led up into the hills where the ground got rocky. Here, the trail became harder to see. Eleanor got off her horse and looked closely at the ground. She found a few hoofprints pointing north. She was about to get back on Daisy when she heard another horse coming. Eleanor grabbed her rifle and hid behind a big rock. She did not know if the rustlers had left someone behind to watch for followers. The rider came closer. Eleanor peeked out from behind the rock. To her surprise, it was the cowboy from Miller's store. He sat tall in his saddle, looking around carefully. He was following the same trail she was. Eleanor stood up from behind the rock. The cowboy saw her and rode over. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, touching his hat. "What are you doing out here?" "Someone stole my cattle last night," Eleanor said. "I'm trying to get them back." Jake looked at the tracks on the ground. His face was serious. "How many did they take?" "At least 20 head," Eleanor said. "Maybe 25. They were my best animals." Jake got down from his horse and studied the tracks more closely. He moved like he knew what he was doing. After a few minutes, he stood up. "3 men," he said. "They're riding north toward the Badlands. They've got about a 6-hour head start." Eleanor stared at him. "How can you tell all that?" "I used to be a Texas Ranger," Jake said. "I've tracked plenty of men and animals. These rustlers aren't being very careful. They think nobody will follow them." "Will you help me get my cattle back?" Eleanor asked. The words came out before she could stop them. Jake looked at her for a long moment. "This could be dangerous, ma'am. These men are thieves. They won't want to give up the cattle without a fight." "Those animals are all I have left," Eleanor said. "If I lose them, I lose the ranch. I lose everything." Jake saw the desperation in her eyes. He thought about his own troubles, his own struggles to survive. But this woman needed help, and Jake had never been able to walk away from someone in trouble. "All right," he said. "We'll get your cattle back. But you have to do exactly what I say. No arguments." Eleanor nodded quickly. "I will. I promise." Jake helped Eleanor onto her horse. Then they began following the trail again. Jake moved much faster than Eleanor had been able to. He saw signs that she had missed. A broken branch here, a hoofprint there. "The men we're following are not very smart," Jake said as they rode. "Good rustlers would have split up the herd and gone different directions. These three are keeping all the cattle together. Is that good for us? Eleanor asked. Yes. It makes them easier to track and easier to catch. They rode for 3 more hours. The sun got hot overhead. Eleanor's horse began to tire, but she pushed on. Jake seemed to know exactly where they were going. Finally, Jake held up his hand for them to stop. They were on top of a hill looking down into a small valley. Below them, Eleanor could see her cattle in a temporary pen made of ropes and stakes. 3 men sat around a small fire drinking coffee and talking. There they are, Jake whispered. Your cattle and the men who took them. Eleanor felt angry looking at the thieves. They were laughing and acting like they had done nothing wrong. What do we do now? Jake studied the scene below. I'm going to ride down there and arrest them. You stay here with the horses. Arrest them? Eleanor said. You're not a ranger anymore. Once a ranger, always a ranger, Jake said. Besides, what they did is stealing. Any citizen can make an arrest for a crime. Eleanor watched Jake check his gun. What if they fight back? Then I'll handle it, Jake said. His voice was calm and sure. But most rustlers are cowards. When they see someone is willing to fight them, they usually give up. Jake started to ride down the hill. Then he stopped and looked back at Eleanor. If shooting starts, you ride back to town as fast as you can, he said. Don't try to help me. Just get yourself safe. Eleanor nodded, but she had no intention of running away. This man was risking his life to help her. The least she could do was stay and watch. Jake rode down into the valley slowly. He kept his hand near his gun but did not draw it yet. Eleanor could see the 3 rustlers looking up at him. They seemed surprised to see anyone. Jake rode right up to their fire. Eleanor could not hear what he said, but she could see him talking to the men. At first they seemed to be arguing. Then one of the rustlers reached for his gun. Jake was faster. His gun came out of its holster like lightning. He pointed it at the 3 men and said something that made them all raise their hands. Eleanor let out a breath she did not know she was holding. Jake had done it. He had captured the rustlers without anyone getting hurt. Jake made the 3 men lie down on the ground. Then he began untying Eleanor's cattle from the makeshift pen. The animals were scared and confused, but they seemed unhurt. Eleanor rode down into the valley to help. Is it over? She asked. It's over, Jake said. These men are going to jail, and you're getting your cattle back. One of the rustlers, a thin man with a dirty beard, looked up at Eleanor. You brought a woman with you? He said to Jake. The woman brought me, Jake said. These are her cattle you stole. The rustler laughed. A woman rancher? That's the funniest thing I ever heard. Jake's face got hard. You won't be laughing when you're breaking rocks in prison. Eleanor felt proud hearing Jake defend her. Most men would have made jokes too, but Jake treated her like she was a real rancher who deserved respect. It took them 2 hours to get the cattle ready to move. Jake tied the 3 rustlers' hands and made them walk ahead of the herd. Eleanor helped drive the cattle from behind. As they headed back toward her ranch, Eleanor looked at Jake riding beside her. He had saved her cattle and maybe her whole future. She did not know how to thank him. Why did you help me? She asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. I know what it's like to lose everything, he said finally. I couldn't let that happen to you if I could stop it. Eleanor felt something warm in her chest. For the first time in months, she did not feel completely alone. Maybe there were still good people in the world. Maybe there was still reason to hope. 3 weeks passed after the cattle rustling. Autumn painted the hills around Cedar Ridge in shades of gold and red. The air grew cooler, and Eleanor found herself looking forward to each new day in a way she had not felt since Robert died. Jake had been coming by the ranch almost every day. At first, he said he just wanted to make sure the rustlers had not come back. But after the sheriff took the 3 thieves to jail, Jake kept finding reasons to visit. This morning, Eleanor heard the sound of hammering coming from her barn. She walked outside to see Jake on the roof, replacing broken boards. His shirt was off in the warm sun, and Eleanor could see the muscles in his back as he worked. You don't have to do that, Eleanor called up to him. Jake looked down at her and smiled. This roof won't make it through the winter with all these holes. Your feed will get wet and spoil. Eleanor felt grateful but also guilty. I can't pay you for all this work. Did I ask for money? Jake said. He went back to hammering. Eleanor watched him work for a while. Jake moved with confidence, like he had fixed many roofs before. Every nail went in straight, every board lined up perfectly. Robert had been handy, but Jake was even better. Where did you learn to do all this? Eleanor asked. Here and there, Jake said. When you drift from place to place, you pick up skills. A man who can fix things always finds work. Eleanor brought Jake a cup of coffee and some biscuits she had baked that morning. He climbed down from the roof and sat on a pile of lumber to eat. These are the best biscuits I've had in years, Jake said. Eleanor felt pleased. She had always been a good cook, but she had not had anyone to cook for since Robert died. I could make you dinner sometime, as payment for all the work you're doing. Jake looked at her with interest. I'd like that. That evening, Jake came to the house for dinner. Eleanor had spent all afternoon cooking. She made fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie. It felt good to cook a real meal again. Jake cleaned up at the water pump outside before coming in. He had put on a clean shirt and combed his hair. Eleanor noticed he smelled like soap instead of horses and leather. This looks like a feast, Jake said, looking at the table full of food. It's been a long time since I cooked for someone else, Eleanor said. I might have made too much. They sat down to eat. At first, the conversation was awkward. Eleanor was not used to having a man in her house who was not Robert, but Jake was easy to talk to. He had traveled to many places and seen many things. I've been from Texas to Montana, Jake said. Worked cattle drives, broke wild horses, even spent a winter trapping beaver in Colorado. Don't you ever want to settle down? Eleanor asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. I used to think the road was all I needed, but lately I've been wondering what it would be like to have a real home. After dinner, they sat on the front porch drinking coffee. The stars were bright in the clear sky. Eleanor felt more relaxed than she had in months. Can I ask you something? Jake said. Of course. What was your husband like? Eleanor thought about Robert. It did not hurt as much to remember him as it used to. He was a good man, gentle and kind. He always believed things would work out, even when they looked bad. You still love him? Jake said. It was not a question. I always will, Eleanor said. But I'm starting to think there might be room in my heart for other feelings too. Jake looked at her in the starlight. Eleanor, I want you to know something. I'm not trying to take his place, I just want to help you build something new. Eleanor felt her heart beat faster. It was the first time Jake had used her first name. What kind of something? I don't know yet, Jake said honestly, but I'd like to find out. The next morning, Jake arrived early to help Eleanor move her cattle to a different pasture. The grass was better on the far side of her land, and the animals needed good feed before winter came. Working together felt natural. Jake knew how to move cattle without spooking them. Eleanor was learning to read the animals' behavior. They made a good team. You're getting better at this, Jake said as they watched the cattle settle into their new field. I'm learning from a good teacher, Eleanor said. Jake showed Eleanor how to check the cattle for signs of sickness. He taught her to look at their eyes and feel their noses. He explained which plants were good for cattle to eat and which ones were poisonous. A rancher has to know these things, Jake said. Your husband probably learned them from his father. You're having to learn them the hard way. Eleanor appreciated that Jake never made her feel stupid for not knowing things. He just taught her patiently, the same way he would teach anyone. One afternoon, Jake found Eleanor sitting on her porch with a book in her lap. She looked frustrated. What's wrong? Jake asked. I'm trying to understand these ranch account books, Eleanor said. Robert kept track of all the money, but his writing is hard to read. I can't figure out what we owe and what people owe us. Jake sat down beside her. Let me take a look. Together, they went through Robert's record books. Jake had a good head for numbers. He helped Eleanor figure out which debts were real and which ones had already been paid. You're in better shape than you thought, Jake said. If you can sell 20 head of cattle before winter, you'll have enough to pay the bank. Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Are you sure? I'm sure. And with the work we've done on the fences and buildings, your ranch is worth more now than it was a month ago. Eleanor looked at Jake with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You don't need to thank me, Jake said. I like being here. I like working with you. Eleanor felt something warm spread through her chest. I like having you here too. As the days grew shorter, Jake and Eleanor spent more time together in the evenings. After the work was done, they would sit by the fireplace and talk. Jake told her stories about his travels. Eleanor shared memories of her childhood and her dreams for the future. One night, Jake noticed a book of poetry on Eleanor's shelf. You like poetry? He asked. Robert used to read it to me, Eleanor said. I never understood it very well. Jake pulled a small book from his coat pocket. I carry this with me wherever I go. Eleanor looked at the worn book in surprise. You read poetry? My mother taught me to read with poetry books, Jake said. She said a man who could appreciate beautiful words would appreciate beautiful things in life. Jake read a poem about autumn leaves and changing seasons. His voice was deep and smooth. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened. The words seemed to match the way she was feeling about her own life changing. When Jake finished reading, Eleanor opened her eyes. That was beautiful. Your mother was right, Eleanor said. A man who reads poetry is different from other men. Jake looked at her in the firelight. Different how? Gentler. More thoughtful. Like he sees things other people miss. Eleanor was beginning to understand that Jake Morrison was not like any man she had ever known. He was strong enough to face down cattle rustlers, but gentle enough to read poetry by firelight. He could fix anything that was broken, but he never made her feel like she was something that needed fixing. Most important, when Jake looked at her, Eleanor felt like the woman she used to be. Not just a widow struggling to survive, but a woman worth caring about. A woman worth staying for. October brought the first big storm of the season. Eleanor woke up to the sound of thunder rolling across the hills. Rain pounded on the roof like thousands of tiny hammers. Wind howled around the corners of the house. She got up and looked out the window. The sky was black even though it was morning. Lightning flashed every few seconds, lighting up the yard like day. This was the kind of storm that could hurt animals and damage buildings. Eleanor dressed quickly and ran outside to check on her cattle. The rain soaked through her clothes in seconds. She could barely see through the water pouring down. The cattle were huddled together under the few trees in the field, looking miserable. As Eleanor ran back toward the house, she saw a rider coming up the road. Even through the rain, she could tell it was Jake. His horse was fighting the wind, and both rider and animal were soaked. Get inside, Eleanor shouted over the storm. Jake jumped down from his horse and led the animal to the barn. Eleanor ran ahead and opened the barn doors for him. Inside, they were both breathing hard and dripping water everywhere. What are you doing out in this weather? Eleanor asked. I was worried about you, Jake said. Storms like this can be dangerous when you're alone. Eleanor felt touched that he had ridden through the storm to check on her. You could have been killed by lightning. So could you, Jake said. I couldn't sit in town knowing you might need help. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it shook the barn. Jake's horse whinnied in fear. Eleanor jumped and moved closer to Jake without thinking about it. It's all right, Jake said softly. The barn is solid. We're safe in here. But even as he said it, Eleanor heard a loud crack from outside. A tree had fallen somewhere nearby. The storm was getting worse, not better. We should get to the house, Jake said. They ran through the rain again. Eleanor's kitchen felt warm and bright after the darkness outside. She built up the fire while Jake lit the oil lamps. Outside, the storm raged on. I'll make coffee, Eleanor said. Her hands were shaking, but not from the cold. Jake took off his wet coat and hung it by the fire. His shirt was damp, but not soaked. Eleanor tried not to look at the way the wet fabric clung to his chest. "Eleanor," Jake said, "I need to tell you something." Something in his voice made Eleanor stop what she was doing. She turned to look at him. His face was serious in the lamplight. "What is it?" Jake sat down at the kitchen table. "I've been thinking a lot lately about my life, about what I want for the future." Eleanor poured coffee for both of them and sat down across from Jake. "What have you been thinking?" "I've spent 15 years drifting from place to place," Jake said. "Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I told myself that was freedom, but now I think it was just fear." "Fear of what?" "Fear of caring too much about something and losing it," Jake said. "Fear of letting myself need another person." Lightning flashed outside, followed by another crash of thunder. Eleanor could see the strain in Jake's face as he struggled to find the right words. "But these past weeks with you have changed something in me," Jake continued. "For the first time in my life, I don't want to move on. I want to stay in one place. I want to build something that lasts." Eleanor's heart was beating fast. She could guess where this conversation was heading, but she was afraid to hope. "Jake," she said softly. "Let me finish," Jake said. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving your husband. I know you might not feel the same way about me that I feel about you." Eleanor reached across the table and put her hand on his. "How do you feel about me?" Jake looked at their joined hands. "I love you, Eleanor. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you never give up, even when everything seems hopeless. I love the way you make me want to be a better man." Eleanor felt tears start in her eyes. "Jake, I know I don't have much to offer," Jake said quickly. "Just my hands and my willingness to work hard. But if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life taking care of you and this ranch." The storm outside seemed to pause for a moment. In the sudden quiet, Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. "I have something to confess too," Eleanor said finally. "I've been falling in love with you and it scares me." Jake looked up at her with hope in his eyes. "Why does it scare you?" "Because I never thought I could love anyone after Robert," Eleanor said. "I thought my heart was broken forever. But you've made me feel alive again." "Is that a bad thing?" "No," Eleanor said. "It's wonderful and terrifying at the same time." Thunder rolled overhead again, but neither of them noticed. They were looking at each other like they were seeing something new and precious. "Eleanor," Jake said, "I know this might sound crazy, but I would trade 10 herds of cattle for one night inside your heart, for one chance to prove that I can make you happy." Eleanor felt her breath catch. No one had ever said anything so romantic to her. Not even Robert. "You don't have to trade anything," Eleanor said. "My heart is already yours if you want it." Jake stood up from the table and came around to where Eleanor was sitting. He knelt down beside her chair and took both her hands in his. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Because once I give you my heart, I won't be able to take it back." "I'm sure," Eleanor said. "I've been sure for weeks. I was just afraid to admit it." Jake leaned forward and kissed her gently. It was different from the way Robert used to kiss her. Jake's kiss was hungry but patient, like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. When they broke apart, Eleanor rested her forehead against Jake's. "What happens now?" "Now we figure out how to build a life together," Jake said. "If you want to." "I want to," Eleanor said, "but people in town are going to talk. A widow falling in love so soon after her husband's death." "Let them talk," Jake said. "What matters is how we feel about each other." Eleanor knew Jake was right, but she also knew how cruel gossip could be in a small town. People would say she had not loved Robert if she could replace him so quickly. They would say she was desperate and improper. But as she looked at Jake's honest face in the lamplight, Eleanor decided she did not care what people said. She had been alone and struggling for too long. If Jake wanted to share her burdens and her joys, she would not let fear stop her from accepting his love. "I have one condition," Eleanor said. "What's that?" "Promise me you won't leave when things get hard. Promise me you're not just looking for a convenient place to spend the winter." Jake took her face in his hands. Eleanor Whitmore, I promise you that I will stay by your side through every storm, every drought, every challenge that comes our way. You'll never have to face anything alone again." Outside, the storm began to quiet down, but inside the warm kitchen, Eleanor and Jake held each other and made plans for a future neither of them had dared to dream about just a few months before. Eleanor knew there would be difficulties ahead. Money troubles, gossip, the hard work of running a ranch. But with Jake beside her, she felt strong enough to handle whatever came their way. For the first time since Robert died, Eleanor looked toward tomorrow with hope instead of fear. Sunday morning came with clear skies and cool air. Eleanor put on her best black dress and walked to church like she did every week. But today felt different. Today she could not stop thinking about Jake's kiss and the promises they had made to each other. Eleanor sat in her usual pew near the back of the church. She tried to focus on Pastor Williams as he read from the Bible, but her mind kept wandering to Jake, who was probably taking care of his cattle outside of town. After the service, Eleanor stood up to leave. But Mrs. Cornelius, the banker's wife, blocked her way. Mrs. Cornelius was a thin woman with sharp eyes and a voice like a crow. "Eleanor, dear," Mrs. Cornelius said loudly, "I need to speak with you." Eleanor noticed that other people in the church were stopping to listen. Mrs. Cornelius always spoke loudly when she wanted an audience. "What about, Mrs. Cornelius?" "About that cowboy who's been spending so much time at your ranch," Mrs. Cornelius said. "People are starting to talk." Eleanor felt her face get hot. "Mr. Morrison has been helping me with ranch work. There's nothing wrong with that." "Of course not, dear," Mrs. Cornelius said in a voice that suggested she thought there was everything wrong with it. "But a young widow must be very careful about appearances. People might get the wrong idea." Mrs. Patterson, the doctor's wife, joined the conversation. "We're only thinking of your reputation, Eleanor. A woman alone is so vulnerable to gossip." "What kind of gossip?" Eleanor asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "Well," Mrs. Cornelius said, lowering her voice just a little, "some people are saying that you're being inappropriate with this stranger, that you're forgetting your dear husband too quickly." Eleanor felt anger rising in her chest. "Robert has been dead for almost 9 months. I'm not forgetting him. I'm trying to survive." "Of course you are, dear," Mrs. Patterson said. "But hiring a man to do work around your ranch is one thing. Having him at your house at all hours is something else entirely." Eleanor looked around the church. Other women were watching the conversation with interest. Some looked sorry for Eleanor. Others looked disapproving. Eleanor realized that her private feelings had become public entertainment. Pastor Williams walked over to the group of women. He was a serious man with gray hair and kind eyes. Eleanor hoped he would defend her. "Ladies," Pastor Williams said, "perhaps this conversation should continue somewhere more private." "Of course, Pastor," Mrs. Cornelius said. "We were just trying to help Eleanor understand how things look to other people." Pastor Williams looked at Eleanor with concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, might I have a word with you privately?" Eleanor followed the pastor to a corner of the church. She felt like a child being called to the front of the class for misbehaving. "Eleanor," Pastor Williams said gently, "I want you to know that I don't listen to gossip, but I am concerned about you." "Why?" "Because I know how hard it's been since Robert died. And I know that loneliness can make us do things we wouldn't normally do." Eleanor felt hurt. Even the pastor thought she was making a mistake. "Mr. Morrison is a good man, Pastor Williams. He's helped me save my ranch." "I'm sure he has," the pastor said. "But I want you to think carefully about what you're doing. A woman's reputation is a precious thing. Once it's damaged, it's very hard to repair." Eleanor left the church feeling upset and confused. She had expected some gossip, but she had not expected it to start so soon. Jake had only been coming to her ranch for a few weeks. As Eleanor walked home, she thought about what the church ladies had said. Was she moving too fast? Was she dishonoring Robert's memory by caring for another man? When Eleanor got to her ranch, Jake was there fixing a loose board on the front porch. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "How was church?" Jake asked. Eleanor tried to smile back, but Jake could see something was wrong. What happened? Jake asked, setting down his hammer. Eleanor told him about the conversation with Mrs. Cornelius and the other women. Jake's face got darker as she talked. They have no right to judge you, Jake said angrily. You haven't done anything wrong. But maybe they're right, Eleanor said. Maybe it is too soon. Maybe people will think less of me. Jake took Eleanor's hands in his. Do you care? About me? Yes, but do you think Robert would want you to be happy? Eleanor thought about her husband. Robert had been a kind man who loved her. Yes, he would want me to be happy. Then that's all that matters, Jake said. What other people think doesn't change. How we feel about each other. But Eleanor could see that the gossip bothered Jake too. He was trying to be strong for her, but she could tell he was worried. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a horse and buggy coming up the road. Eleanor looked and saw Mr. Fitzgerald, the banker, driving toward the house. What does he want? Jake asked. Nothing good, Eleanor said. Mr. Fitzgerald only came to the ranch when there were money problems. Mr. Fitzgerald was a small man with a thin mustache and expensive clothes. He climbed down from his buggy and walked over to Eleanor and Jake with a serious expression. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Fitzgerald said, I need to speak with you about your loan. What about it? Eleanor asked. I told you I would have the money before winter. Mr. Fitzgerald looked at Jake with disapproval. I'm afraid there have been some developments that change things. What kind of developments? The bank has received some complaints about your situation here, Mr. Fitzgerald said. Some of our customers are concerned about lending money to someone who might not be reliable. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. What does that mean? It means that the bank is calling in your loan immediately, Mr. Fitzgerald said. You have 30 days to pay the full amount, or we will take possession of your ranch. Jake stepped forward. You can't do that. She's never missed a payment. The loan agreement gives the bank the right to call in the debt at any time if we feel the borrower is a risk, Mr. Fitzgerald said coldly. Eleanor felt the world spinning around her. How much do I owe? $850, Mr. Fitzgerald said. Plus interest. Call it $900 total. Eleanor knew she did not have that much money. Even if she sold every cow she owned, she would not have enough. Please, Eleanor said, give me more time, I can get the money. I'm sorry, Mr. Fitzgerald said, but he did not sound sorry at all. The decision has been made. 30 days, Mrs. Whitmore. After Mr. Fitzgerald left, Eleanor sat down on the porch steps and put her head in her hands. Everything she had worked, for everything Robert had built, was about to be lost. We'll figure something out, Jake said, sitting down beside her. How? Eleanor asked. Where am I going to get $900 in 30 days? Jake was quiet for a long moment. I have some money saved up. Not much, but maybe $50. Eleanor looked at him with gratitude, but $50 would not be nearly enough. Jake, Eleanor said. Maybe the church ladies were right. Maybe I am moving too fast. Maybe I should send you away before things get worse. Jake turned to face her. Is that what you want? Eleanor looked at this man who had become so important to her. She thought about facing the future alone again. She thought about losing the ranch and having no one to turn to. No, Eleanor said finally. I don't want you to go, but I don't know how to fight a whole town. We'll find a way, Jake said. We'll prove to everyone that what we have is real and good. And if they still don't accept it, then we'll build our life somewhere else. Eleanor leaned against Jake's shoulder. She knew the next few weeks would be the hardest of her life, but at least she would not have to face them alone. 2 weeks passed after the banker's threat. Eleanor and Jake worked desperately to find a way to save the ranch. They sold every cow they could spare, but it was not enough. They were still $300 short of what the bank demanded. Eleanor had not slept well in days. She spent her nights adding and subtracting numbers trying to find money that did not exist. Jake could see the worry eating away at her, and it made him feel helpless. On a cold Tuesday morning, Jake rode into town to buy supplies. He hoped to find someone who might lend Eleanor money or buy more cattle. But as he tied his horse outside Miller's store, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A man in a black coat was talking to the sheriff. Jake recognized him immediately, even though it had been 5 years since he had seen that face. Black Jack Sullivan, the most dangerous man Jake had ever known. Jake tried to walk past without being seen, but Sullivan looked up at exactly the wrong moment. Their eyes met across the street. Sullivan smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. Well, Sullivan called out loudly. If it isn't Jake Morrison, I've been looking for you, old friend. Jake stopped walking. He knew running would only make things worse. Sullivan crossed the street slowly, like a cat stalking a mouse. Hello, Jack, Jake said, quietly. It's been a long time. 5 years, Sullivan said. 5 years since you left me to hang in that jail in Austin. Jake remembered that day clearly. He and Sullivan had been partners in the Texas Rangers, but Sullivan had been taking money from outlaws, selling information about Ranger movements. When Jake found out, he had turned Sullivan into their captain. You were crooked, Jack, Jake said. You were getting good men killed. And you were always too honest for your own good, Sullivan said. His hand rested on the gun at his hip. But I didn't come here to talk about old times. People on the street were starting to notice the tension between the two men. Some moved away quickly. Others stopped to watch, sensing that trouble was coming. What do you want? Jake asked. I want you to pay for what you did to me, Sullivan said. 5 years in prison, Jake. 5 years of thinking about how I was going to make you suffer. Jake could see the sheriff watching from across the street, but the sheriff was an old man who probably could not move fast enough to help if shooting started. This doesn't have to happen here, Jake said. There are innocent people around. You should have thought of that before you betrayed your partner, Sullivan said. Eleanor chose that moment to come out of the general store. She saw Jake standing in the street facing another man. Something about the way they were positioned told her this was dangerous. Jake? Eleanor called out. Sullivan turned to look at her. His smile got wider and more evil. Well, is this your woman, Jake? She's even prettier than I heard. Jake felt fear rush through him, but not for himself. If anything happened to Eleanor because of his past, he would never forgive himself. Leave her out of this, Jack, Jake said. This is between you and me. Maybe, Sullivan said. Or maybe I'll take her with me when I'm done with you. A little payment for the years you cost me. Eleanor heard the threat and started walking toward them. Jake held up his hand to stop her. Stay back, Eleanor, Jake called out. Go back in the store. But Eleanor had been through too much to be frightened away now. She had faced rustlers and bank threats and town gossip. She was not going to abandon Jake when he needed her most. I'm not leaving you, Eleanor said firmly. Sullivan laughed. She's got spirit. I like that in a woman. Jake knew he had to end this quickly before Eleanor got hurt. He also knew that Sullivan was probably faster with a gun than he was. Sullivan had always been quick on the draw. All right, Jack, Jake said. You want to settle this? Let's settle it. But we do it right. High noon, 1 hour from now. Give these people time to get off the street. Sullivan considered this. Fair enough, but if you try to run, I'll hunt you down, and I'll start by paying a visit to your pretty lady friend. Jake nodded. I'll be here. Sullivan walked away, probably to get a drink and check his weapons. Jake turned to Eleanor, who had gone pale. What was that about? Eleanor asked. Jake told her quickly about his history with Sullivan, about the partnership that went bad and the betrayal that sent Sullivan to prison. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Eleanor asked. Because I hoped it would never matter, Jake said. I thought I had left that life behind. Eleanor took Jake's hands. They were shaking slightly. What are you going to do? I'm going to face him, Jake said. It's the only way to end this. But what if he kills you? Jake looked at Eleanor's frightened face. Then you'll be free to find someone better. Someone without a dangerous past. Eleanor slapped him. Not hard, but enough to get his attention. Don't you dare talk like that. Don't you dare give up on us now. Jake touched his cheek where she had hit him. Eleanor, I may not survive this. If I don't, I want you to know that these past weeks with you have been the best of my life. You're going to survive, Eleanor said fiercely. And then we're going to figure out how to save the ranch and deal with all the gossips and build the life we planned. Jake kissed her quickly. I love you. I love you too, Eleanor said. Now go show that man what happens when someone threatens your family. Word of the gunfight spread quickly through town. By noon, most of the main street had been cleared. People watched from windows and doorways. The sheriff stood ready to step in if needed, but everyone knew this was between Jake and Sullivan. Eleanor refused to hide. She stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the general store, where Jake could see her. She wanted him to know she believed in him. At exactly noon, Jake and Sullivan faced each other in the dusty street. They stood about 20 feet apart. The sun was directly overhead, so neither man had an advantage. Any last words, Jake? Sullivan called out. Jake thought about Eleanor watching him. He thought about the life they were building together. He thought about all the reasons he had to survive this fight. Just one, Jake said. I'm not the same man you knew 5 years ago. I have something worth fighting for now. Sullivan reached for his gun, but Jake was ready. All those years of practice, all that training as a Texas Ranger came back to him. His hand moved faster than it ever had before. 2 shots rang out at almost the same time. Sullivan's bullet went wide, hitting the wooden post next to where Jake stood. Jake's bullet hit its target. Sullivan fell to the ground and did not get up. Jake stood in the street for a moment, hardly believing it was over. Then Eleanor ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. It's finished, Jake said, holding her tight. He can't hurt us anymore. The sheriff checked on Sullivan and confirmed what everyone already knew. The threat from Jake's past was finally gone. As the crowd began to break up, Jake realized something important had happened. He had faced his worst fear and survived. He had proved to himself and to Eleanor that he was willing to fight for their future. More than that, Eleanor had stood by him even when she learned about the dangerous parts of his past. That kind of loyalty was worth more than gold. Come on, Eleanor said, taking Jake's hand. Let's go home. For the first time, Jake realized that Eleanor's ranch really felt like home to him. Not just a place to work or rest, but a place where he belonged. A place where he was loved and accepted, past and all. Spring came early to Cedar Ridge that year. By March, green grass was pushing up through the brown earth. The hills were covered with wildflowers, and the stream that ran through Eleanor's land was full of fresh water from melted snow. Eleanor stood on her front porch watching Jake work with the new calves in the pasture. It had been 5 months since the gunfight with Black Jack Sullivan. 5 months since Jake had proved his love by risking his life to protect their future. A lot had changed since then. The story of the gunfight had spread through the county like wildfire. But instead of making people think worse of Jake, it had the opposite effect. People began to see him as a hero who had cleaned up the town by getting rid of a dangerous criminal. More importantly, an unexpected visitor had arrived 3 days after the shooting. A cattle buyer from Denver had heard about the fight and decided to stop in Cedar Ridge on his way through. He was impressed by the quality of Eleanor's cattle and offered to buy her entire herd at top prices. With that money, Eleanor had been able to pay off the bank loan with plenty left over to buy new cattle and improve the ranch. Mr. Fitzgerald had not been happy about losing the chance to take her land, but there was nothing he could do about it. Eleanor smiled as she remembered the look on the banker's face when she walked into his office with a bag full of money. She had paid every penny she owed and closed her account the same day. Eleanor, Jake called from the pasture. Come see this. Eleanor walked out to where Jake was standing. He pointed to a cow that was lying in the grass with a brand new calf beside her. Born this morning, Jake said proudly. That makes 35 new calves this season. Eleanor looked at the little animal trying to stand on wobbly legs. New life always made her feel hopeful about the future. He's beautiful, Eleanor said. Jake put his arm around Eleanor's shoulders, just like his mama. Eleanor leaned against Jake's strong frame. Even after all these months, she sometimes could not believe how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been alone and struggling. Now she had a partner who loved her and a ranch that was growing stronger every day. "Jake," Eleanor said, "I have something to tell you." "What's that?" Eleanor had been planning this conversation for weeks, but she still felt nervous. "I went to see Pastor Williams yesterday." Jake looked at her with interest. "About what?" "About us getting married." Jake stopped breathing for a moment. They had talked about marriage many times, but Eleanor had always said she wanted to wait until the ranch was secure and the gossip died down. "What did he say?" Jake asked carefully. "He said he would be honored to perform the ceremony," Eleanor said. "If we want him to." Jake turned to face Eleanor completely. "Do you want him to?" Eleanor looked into Jake's eyes. They were the same, storm gray color they had been when she first met him, but now they were full of love and hope instead of loneliness. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I want to be your wife." Jake picked Eleanor up and spun her around in a circle. When he set her down, they were both laughing. "When?" Jake asked. "Saturday, if that's all right with you," Eleanor said. "I thought we could have a simple ceremony here on the ranch, just a few close friends." Jake kissed her gently. "Saturday sounds perfect." The wedding was everything Eleanor had hoped for. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony on the front porch of the house with the green hills as a backdrop. Tom Miller and his wife came from town, along with a few other friends who had supported Eleanor through her difficult times. Eleanor wore a blue dress that she had sewn herself. It was not fancy, but it was new and pretty. Jake wore his best suit and had gotten a haircut in town that morning. When Pastor Williams asked if they had vows to say to each other, Eleanor spoke first. "Jake Morrison," she said, "you came into my life when I thought it was over. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that love can come twice in one lifetime if you're brave enough to accept it. I promise to love you, to trust you, and to work beside you for all the days of my life." Jake's voice was rough with emotion when he spoke. "Eleanor Whitmore, you saved me from a life of wandering. You taught me what it means to have a home worth staying for. I promise to protect you, to cherish you, and to never give you reason to regret choosing me. I would trade 10 herds of cattle for one night inside your heart, and you have given me something even more precious. You have given me forever." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Eleanor, like it was the first time and the last time all at once. Eleanor felt like her heart might burst from happiness. After the ceremony, they had a simple dinner on the porch. Tom Miller played his fiddle while the guests danced on the wooden floor Jake had built for the occasion. Eleanor had never felt more beautiful or more loved. As the sun began to set, the guests said their goodbyes and headed back to town. Eleanor and Jake stood together watching the last buggy disappear down the road. "Well, Mrs. Morrison," Jake said, "how does it feel to be married?" Eleanor smiled at the sound of her new name. "It feels like coming home." They walked out to the pasture to check on the cattle one more time before dark. The animals were peaceful in the evening light. New calves stayed close to their mothers. The grass was green and thick. "Look what we built," Jake said, gesturing at the thriving ranch around them. Eleanor thought about everything they had been through together. The rustlers, the gossip, the bank troubles, the gunfight. Each challenge had made them stronger and brought them closer together. "We make a good team," Eleanor said. "The best," Jake agreed. As they walked back to the house, Eleanor thought about Robert. She would always love him and be grateful for the years they had together. But she no longer felt guilty about moving forward with her life. Robert would have wanted her to be happy. He would have liked Jake and approved of the choice she had made. That night, as Eleanor and Jake sat by the fireplace in their house, Jake pulled out his book of poetry. But instead of reading something by someone else, he had written something himself. For Eleanor, he said, and began to read. She was a woman wounded by loss, standing alone in the storm. But she had strength like the mountains, and a heart that could still feel warmth. She taught me that home is not a place on a map, but a feeling that lives in the soul. She showed me that love is not something you find once and lose forever. but something that grows new roots wherever two hearts decide to plant it together. Eleanor felt tears start in her eyes. "Jake, that's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," Jake said, closing the book and pulling Eleanor close. As they held each other by the firelight, Eleanor thought about the future. There would be more challenges, she knew. Droughts and storms, and the everyday struggles of ranch life. But they would face everything together. Outside, the spring wind blew gently across the hills. New grass grew in the fields. Young cattle grew strong under the stars. And inside the warm house, two people who had found love in the most unexpected place made plans for all the tomorrows that stretched ahead of them. Eleanor Morrison fell asleep that night in her husband's arms, listening to the sound of his heart, beating and feeling grateful for every moment that had led her to this perfect happiness. She had lost everything once and thought her story was over. But sometimes the best chapters come after the worst endings. Sometimes love finds a way to begin again.